Take the roll, please.
Director Finch,
Yes.
Director Hahn,
It's going to be Hages, Dilkey, Finch, Bagley, and Johnson.
Director Johnson,
Here.
Director Bagley, and Chair Hages.
Here.
And Director Dilkey hasn't come in yet, I don't believe.
All right. What's the pleasure of the board on the Pledge of Allegiance? You want to do it, or do you want to skip it until we have a better way to do this?
I'd say you skip it until we meet.
I second it.
Okay, item 3, director comments. Peter's not here. Jim, any comments?
Nothing that I can think of.
Oh,
No, none that I can think of.
okay. Johnny?
The only, pardon me, the only report is that there was a grant that has been approved with a lot of work on a part of a lot of people, but the city is going to administer it, and it's to clear the Stewart Canyon area there behind City Hall. And the reason I mention it, it does a number of things, fire mitigation, but it also has promised to improve the in-stream flow. I don't know by how much, but it'll contribute.
Okay. Russ isn't here, and I don't have any comments.
Yeah.
General Manager?
The only thing I wanted to mention on this item is I've drafted up a scope of work, a request for proposal, and a consulting services agreement that both Mr. Keir and Mr. Candy have both reviewed and provide comment. And this is so we can prepare the groundwater sustainability plan. Looks like right now, based upon just a couple of minor changes I need to make as far as formatting, probably get that out the first of the week. It's all going to be done by email. I'm going to be contacting 5 firms and letting them know it's coming. I just need to get the contact information. So hopefully we'll, and my thought is to get proposals back by May 20th, and hopefully we can have a discussion about this at your May meeting.
Thank you. Russ is here. Can you hear us, Russ?
Yeah, finally.
Okay.
Hi, Russ.
There he is.
Zoom is way above my pay grade, I'll tell you.
Well, we just got started, Russ. So the only thing you missed is, do you have any comments, board comments?
Well, say hello to my cat, too. No, I don't have any comments. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Okay, the next item is Basin status report. Jordan?
Okay, thank you very much.
Hang on a second, Jordan. Did you already go by the report from Casitas on the lake level?
No, we missed that.
Okay.
If you want to report it.
All right.
Do you have it?
Yeah, it's at 44.9%, which equals 106,737 acre feet. And we probably be changing lake level status from 3 to 2 coming up.
Really?
Really? Jeff thinks so too.
Okay, Jordan. All right, that's tough good news to follow, Russ, but I'll do my best. The highlight is that as of today, let me see if I can shift this over. Maybe you can see this hydrograph, maybe you can't. If it's on the big enough screen, or if I'm in speaker view here.
It's great.
you'll see that the water level hydrograph today, well, at least 427, which was Monday, we were at 117.78 feet in the Key Well, Elrod Well, trending upwards still with 76% basin capacity or 60,800 acre feet. What's somewhat most encouraging about that number is that's the exact depth to water we had at the peak of 2019. So on July 1st, 2019, we were at 117.78 feet with the same amount of storage in the basin. And what we like about that is that was a 9-year high then. And pretty much every time since the 27th, as water levels continue to rise, we are at a new 10-year high, which is great. And you owe this a lot to, I think, the pattern of the rainfall. And Jim, you can attest to this to some degree, how this dry January and February were kind of a blessing in disguise because March and April were relatively wetter. So during the coolest times when the trees weren't taken up as much, it was dry, but the water that we got in November and December found its way into the aquifers. And then we get this second spike in March and April that have really contributed tremendously to the status of the basin. That's also reflected in the flow transects that we do. And we zoom on over to this one now. I don't know if you can see this one, but
Don't bother, Jordan. You can't read a thing.
it's too tough. Okay, I'll narrate it. But basically, since we started doing this monthly, and this is part of the Wildlife Conservation Board grant that we've received here, since July of 2019, we've been measuring the flow at the discharge point in San Antonio Creek from the basin, and July was 1.77 CFS. We got down as low as 0.96 CFS in February of all times. And then now we're up to almost 3 CFS leaving the basin. In fact, 2.8 feet are coming from San Antonio Creek proper, and another half CFS is coming from Montgomery Creek in the same area that Mayor Johnston was just describing. So a good amount of water, more than we've seen since we started this measuring process here at this location, in this fashion, is exiting the basin as surface water. Surface water continues to flow throughout the basin. You can stand on Grand Avenue Bridge and see water flowing underneath it. I don't think these volumes or these flow rates are high enough to trigger diversion to the spreading grounds, but they are certainly encouraging with respect to a sustainable basin.
Jordan, Jim could I ask a question? You gave 427 data, and
yes,
it was 3 feet closer to the surface than the 416 data that was sent out in our pre-read material.
Correct. Yeah.
How come the capacity and that doesn't change at all? That I would have thought 3 feet would have added 1% or something, or how much movement need to change it?
It did move the needle a little bit. I think we went from like 75 to 76%.
Okay.
So, a couple 100 acre feet came in there.
Okay.
Yep. So you're right. And yes.
Jordan, on the surface flows, are the flows at the confluence?
That came across kind of
bridge, or there'd be masses. When you're
across the
measuring
basin.
the flows when you're measuring the flows on the San Antonio Creek by the city, are there corresponding measurements being taken at the confluence?
Yes. So the county has active gauges that record at least peak flows for those days and or average flows of those days at Old Creek Road Bridge, which is closest to the confluence with the Ventura River. And They also have the gauge at Grand Avenue and near the diversion of the spreading grounds. So there are data that we have access to with county cooperation, their hydrology department, of both upstream and downstream of this point, but they don't have anything here. There's also the gauge at Creek Road near Camp Comfort, so that's a helpful data point. So all told, there are some half a dozen gauging points between the headwaters and the confluence with the Ventura River and San Antonio Creek, including the data that we collect manually.
Sorry, I dropped off there. I got half your answer, but I guess my question is there an effort to coordinate these measurements during low flow periods throughout the creek, so we have some idea of what the gains and losses are?
Yes, and again, the short answer is the low flow data that we have from the county and state agencies that monitor this are on a daily basis. So those snapshots can be compared to the timestamps that we are collecting data on typically the last day of every month.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions?
Not here.
All right, the next item is consent agenda, the approval of the minutes.
You move to approve. This is Johnny.
Second. Russ.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Call the roll.
Okay. Director Finch,
Yes.
Director Baggerly,
Yes.
Director Johnson,
Yes.
Chair Hages,
Yes.
And Director Filkey is absent.
Okay, the next item is a treasurer's report.
Yeah, I didn't know if you wanted to go through each of these individually. We didn't have a chance to give you the February financials, but we put in February and March in this agenda. We had in February we had, I think, more outflows. We had to transfer some money over, but there was also a invoices were sent out related to extraction, so we're starting to see some of that revenue coming in. Overall, we're still in pretty good shape financially, and we've got about $150,000 roughly in reserves. I know several of us are spending more time. Myself and I believe Jordan and Peter are spending more time on activities related to the groundwater sustainability plan and trying to move that forward. Jordan has also been working on the grant for the Wildlife Conservation Board, and we've made a first billing on that as well. So I did get a feedback today that they need a little more information, but I can get that taken care of fairly quickly. Overall, we're still in pretty good shape. I suspect we won't be seeing any significant changes in our fund balances until we start spending a lot more in the development of the groundwater sustainability plan. You have disbursement registers in here for March, plus the cash flow for both months, March and February. And you have the budget actuals for each month. So I don't know if you had any questions, but we're still financially in pretty good shape, but we haven't got to the point where we're going to spend a lot of money just quite yet.
Well, that sounds good. If there aren't any significant questions for these documents, I'll move approval.
Again, I'll second it. Johnny.
Gotcha.
who was first?
Russ.
Thank you. Director Finch,
Yes.
Director Baggerly,
Yes.
Director Johnston,
Yes.
Chair Hages.
I don't know where he went.
I think he's on mute, it sounds like.
Yeah,
Looks like he's on mute.
he's muted. Richard, you're muted.
Sorry. I skipped public comments, items not on the agenda. Is there anyone out there that has a comment on an
Richard,
item?
you're still muted.
We didn't get your vote on the,
If this quarantine goes on further, wind up with
Richard, did you have a vote on the treasurer's report?
Oh, I'm sorry, I was on mute. I guess not. We called the roll, yes.
Okay, just wanted to get that for the record.
Okay. All right, no public comments on items not on the agenda. So we can move to action items number 8, and we do have public comments. Greg, are still on? Well, let's proceed with the discussion, and as he listens, maybe he will come back on. Go ahead, John, if you would.
Well, I know Richard, Jordan asked me to put this on the agenda, and I've done that. And so within the agenda, we've provided some plates that talk about the basin boundaries, both for the approved by Department of Water Resources for the basin boundary modifications, and also OBGMA has its own boundaries established through its act originally. Peter's also gone through and looked at this, and I'm sure you've got some comments as well related to this. But Jordan, you want to jump in there and talk a little bit about what this is all about?
Sure. Thank you, John. This issue of am I in the basin, am I out of the basin is probably been disputed since before the OBGMA existed. Nevertheless, some basin boundaries that we've modified to be the official basin boundaries for both SGMA and the DWR are really based in the most sound geologic science that we have for the alluvial portion of the Ojai Basin. Now, there's the OBGMA jurisdictional boundary, which is much larger, includes some of the tributary area and a little sliver that is of the alluvial portion of the basin that is not part of the OBGMA jurisdiction via the property description in its enabling legislature. So there's the large OBGMA jurisdiction. There's also the relatively smaller basin boundary. And it's my understanding that most of the policies associated with SGMA, including the groundwater sustainability planning, groundwater sustainability agency, some of the accounting that's going to go in and to and out of that from a water balance and a revenue standpoint, really don't match exactly. So the alluvial portion of the basin would need, is my understanding, is that's what SGMA was intended to address. All of the potential undesirable results coming in and out of the manageable or management areas of the sustainability agency vis-a-vis the alluvial basin boundary. Sounds like somebody's getting a phone call there. So the idea is if you've got wells that are in the gray area, we call it, between the alluvial basin boundary and the OBGMA jurisdictional boundary, while still within the OBGMA sphere, it's outside of the alluvial basin sphere for which SGMA is intended to address. So the question comes to mind is, hey, I've got a well here, and Mr. Grinnell penned this email to the agency questioning, hey, I'm out of the basin now. What happens? Am I no longer part of the OBGMA? Am I just not part of the GSA? How does that work? So what we decided to do was put forth the maps that were in the agenda item here, basically showing the basin boundaries as presented in the DWR and straight out of county view, and also the OBGMA jurisdiction. And then we took it a step further and found all of the active wells that are present within that gray area and subject to, for lack of a better word, the Grinnell rule, wherein you're in that gray area extracting groundwater from a bedrock formation, a bedrock well exclusively, outside of the alluvial portion of the basin, but inside OBGMA jurisdiction. So that's about where my pay grade ends. And we bring this up the ladder to this guy and that guy and that guy and that guy to really discuss what this means as far as fees going forward to fund the GSP and its implementation, and the remaining fees associated with the OBGMA extraction and wellhead recordation.
Peter Candy, you had some comments also. You sent us an email earlier. I'd appreciate you sharing that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the email that I sent earlier was on a slightly different issue, but I've looked at this, and the agency's SGMA authority extends to the full extent of its jurisdictional boundaries. And so if the agency were inclined to impose SGMA extraction fees on wells outside the basin boundary, I believe it has the authority to do that. I do believe, though, that in order to bolster the record, so to speak, the agency would need to make a finding that the wells outside the DWR boundary, but within the agency's jurisdictional boundaries in the so-called gray area, interact with and affect the alluvial basin. In other words, the bedrock wells, there's some sort of a connection between the pumping that's done from the bedrock wells and the alluvial basin. There's an effect on the alluvial basin. And I think if that finding can be made, then I think it's very clear that the agency would have the authority to impose, regulate, and otherwise exercise its SGMA authority with respect to these wells in the gray area.
Okay.
And to that end, because it's somewhat technical, if I may, Peter, the amount of water that's extracted by many of these wells within the gray area is relatively small. And while, yes, it's true, there is some effect on extraction from those wells and basin hydrology, it's really dwarfed by the interaction between basin hydrology, between the alluvium and the bedrock formations that are well north mostly, and east and west of the OBGMA jurisdiction, namely the Coldwater and Matilaha formations. Those tend to store more water and release more water into the basin, effectively dwarfing the noise of these gray area wells. So just from a technical standpoint, yes, potentially measurable, but not I don't think very significant at all.
Okay, that's helpful.
This is Russ. Can I?
Go ahead, Russ.
Did anybody hear that?
Yes.
Thank you. I'd like to read you from section 313 of the enabling legislation, which is from the definitions. Groundwater basin means a geologically and hydrologically defined area containing one or more aquifers, which store, transmit, and yield significant quantities of water to wells or are capable of doing so. In my opinion, the bedrock wells are not going to be subject to SGMA because they're not from an aquifer. I would disagree with council.
Well, and I think one other factor in the whole thing about SGMA and ultimately the fees, SGMA says we're not to charge anybody at 2 acre feet or less. And Jordan, I think if I'm correct, a lot of these wells are not going to pump over 2 acre feet. And so the reality is that if that's true, they wouldn't get a SGMA charge to begin with.
Let me just clarify that.
Okay.
You're talking about the de minimis extractor, which I think, is the next item on the agenda.
Right.
That only applies to domestic wells.
Okay.
So if one of these wells that's pumping 2 acre-feet or less is pumping for agricultural purposes, it's not subject to the exemption.
Yeah.
And if the board so choose, it could impose a fee on such a well.
Do we know how
John?
many of these wells are?
23.
23.
Are they all 2 acre-feet and under?
John, do you have that number, or
I
maybe
do.
Roberta does?
Well, I haven't looked at the report that Jordan prepared and matched it against the well report that we've prepared, but I can't say at this time, but I'm sure we can validate that pretty quick.
One of the things I would suggest is, so that we don't slow up the process here, is part of our GSP could be evaluating the boundaries and any conflicts we have between the two defined boundaries. So the plan could include an evaluation of that. We may make a determination that neither one of the boundaries is accurate, depending on the information we get. And that doesn't have to be determined in the plan. It could be part of the plan to do that evaluation in the future and adjust those boundaries. That gives us time to think about this. We don't levy fees on somebody that we may not have the authority to do until we can reconcile this. But I don't think it doesn't seem to be anything that is that urgent, and I'd hate to go through the process of doing this more than once. So.
Well, we kind of did it before, Richard, with the alternative demonstration. And Jordan, you're going to have to refresh my memory. Some of those bedrock wells on the southern portion closest to the Santa Ana Fault, and they were old oil wells, were they not? And not very good ones at that. Do you remember?
Yes, sure. So part of the information we used for delineating the basin boundary in 2016, or at least what was adopted by the DWR in 2016, included a review of really the producibility of fresh water from alluvial aquifers. And we evaluated many wells that were reported as water wells, but either had salty water, tar, crude oil, too much gas, or otherwise not really suitable for a water well by the state standard, including having less than 25 feet of alluvial thickness that a new water well would be required to have as a sanitary seal, equivalent depth. So all of that went into that evaluation, and the lines, the basin boundaries that came out of that evaluation, as time goes on and we get boots on the ground at different properties and look more closely reality versus the Dibley or the Tannen-Jones geologic maps that we used shape files from to evaluate and delineate those basin boundaries, we certainly can modify that. I don't expect it to change too much with respect to the modern alluvial basin boundary, but there still are the question of the 23 wells active, and more potentially at some point in the future, and less, I guess, for that matter, that are within that gray area. And that's I think that's really the question of this agenda item is, how do we address that, or do we table it until a later date?
Richard is
John, what's
suggesting
your
we table it.
Yeah, well, I suggest that we do not include those wells in this fee increase so that we don't wind up in conflict with someone. We really don't know what our authority truly is. And then table this for discussion and possibly, include it on our plan to reevaluate the boundaries.
Well, yeah, and I don't necessarily disagree. I guess one of the things I wanted to say, I was going to mention in the next item, is if you look at, we've got about 150 roughly extractors in the basin, and about 88 of those are less, or 2 acre feet or less. And so if you calculate that in the total usage, it's a pretty small amount of water, you know. And how much effort do we want to spend chasing down a small amount of water to get a small amount of revenue? And so I think
So you'd leave the OBGMA fees as they are, and the Sigma fees would only be for those in the defined alluvial area.
and
That-
greater than 2 acre feet.
Well, just in the defined area.
Yeah. Regardless.
Yes.
Right, that's correct.
I have one question. Looking at this map, is the golf course well included in the DWR basin boundary?
The Soul Park well or the Ojai
It's in
Valley?
the-
Soul Park.
Yeah,
Soul
Soul
Park.
Park is.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
It's not a bedrock well at all.
Okay.
At least aerially.
Yeah. So I guess my suggestion is we exclude all wells outside of the DWR boundary from this fee increase until that can be evaluated at a later time.
Okay. Is that a
Does
motion?
anyone?
I'll make that motion.
Yeah, I'll
I'll
second it.
make that second. Okay.
All right, call the roll.
Actually, shouldn't we just, because we haven't even gotten to raising the fees up yet, shouldn't we just, when we do the fee raise, exclude them at that point in time?
I think that's a good suggestion. What we were looking for today was a direction on how to structure the resolution that you
Yeah.
adopt at the next meeting.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll withdraw my motion because it seems
I'll withdraw my
cart before the horse.
Okay, can I just make a quick comment? This is Greg Grinnell.
Yes.
Hi, Greg.
Yeah, how are you doing? Okay, so our well is definitely a fractured bedrock well. It's got a flow of about 5 feet per minute. However, our total usage is somewhere between 2.25 acre feet to 2.5, depending on weather. It is domestic use. We have it's just for a couple acre or 2.5 acres. But so it is bedrock. It's low flow, but we do use more than 2 acre feet a year. So that's really all I have to say. Although my belief is that we're not part of the Louisville, so we should not be part of the SGMA fees. That's all I have to say.
And that's
All right, well, thanks, Greg. All right, item number C, groundwater sustainability plan cost of service analysis. John.
Yes. You've seen this table before that's within the report. What the purpose of the entire report with the staff report, the memorandum, the table that you had previously shown you, and then the exhibits for less than 2 acre feet, equal to or less than 2 acre feet, or greater than 2 acre feet, is for the purposes of documenting ultimately if and when the board does decide to impose a Sigma charge, we've got a justification for it based on cost, and we understand who the de minimis extractors are that generally, probably more than likely, most would not be charged a fee. Depending on how much work you want to do, the concern I have about the de minimis extractors, I think on the last page of my report, the equal to or less than 2 acre feet is about 88 acre feet. And that's out of around almost 4,500 acre feet. So it's a pretty small amount. And the grand scheme of it is it's not an awful lot of revenue. At the end of the day, I mean, it is some revenue and ultimately would be less that others would have to pay. But Sigma is, as Mr. Candy pointed out, does not allow the groundwater sustainability charges, at least for the plan, to be placed against the 2 acre feet or less pumpers. And so what we're trying to do with this report is just justify the expenditures related to development of the groundwater sustainability plan. And again, who are the pumpers that were either greater than or less than 2 acre feet? One point of clarification, and I've talked to Director Finch about this. I think at one of our previous board meetings, it wasn't clear that the $37 per acre foot fee that would be necessary, and that can be found on line G of the table that I put together. It says fee table 2. That would be in addition to the current $25 per acre feet. So what we did was looked at the total cost of developing a groundwater sustainability plan, spreading it over several years, and using some of the agency reserves to help cover the cash flow gap. But it would still require an additional $37 per acre foot on top of the $25 that you're already charging for operations of OBGMA.
And John called me, and I was thinking it was $12 incremental, not 37. I mean, it's a lot bigger number, but I still stand. I'm still in the same spot. So I fully understand it now that it's the 25 plus the 37 for a total of 62 is where it would total out at.
Yeah. The last 3 pages of my report, I put in a column that says, if you were to approve a GSP fee or groundwater sustainability plan fee of $37, what does it mean for each of the extractors that are greater than 2 acre feet? And I didn't put names in there. There's a certain condition of privacy that well owners expect. We have the information on who that would apply to, but in some cases it's substantial, and certainly Casitas Municipal Water District would have, I think, 4 wells that they would be paying additional fees on as well. But it gives you the idea of what's the breadth of the increase in fees to the various pumpers that are over 2 acre feet.
Let me ask a question, if I could, on this 2 acre feet or less. Do we know, or is there any way to estimate the number of those pumpers that are pumping exclusively for domestic purposes versus those that are pumping for both domestic and agricultural purposes? Because only the pumpers for domestic purposes are exempt from the fee increase under Sigma. And if the board wanted to go and impose the $37 per acre foot fee increase on less than 2 acre foot per year pumpers who are pumping for agricultural purposes, it could do that. I just want to make that clear.
Yeah, I think, Peter, I'll have to work with staff regarding if we can find that information. I think what we've got in the database is most of the people that are 2 acre feet or less are either domestic or they're serving domestic and agricultural, and it's through one device. And so I don't think we could differentiate how much of that water is for ag and how much is domestic in a combined meter situation or a combined use situation.
That's where you just ask them to make an educated guess.
Yeah. And so it'll take a little bit of work to go through that. We'll run some other reports, and then we'll see how much field reconnaissance we have to do, if we have to do any. But
Casitas does the same thing. I mean, they have a lot of meters that serve a house plus ag, and they allot X for the house, for the domestic, and then the balance
right
goes higher.
In my experience, and when I was working for Las Virgenes Water, and there was an ag rate they would apply and there was a single meter, generally, if I recall, the domestic side was usually, the use was usually considered 2 acre-feet or less. It's a pretty common measurement in the industry. And so if they were using 2 acre-feet or less, they generally didn't get the ag rate. And so, you know, I think if we're going to hit everybody with over 2 acre-feet, it's not going to be a problem. But I think we could spend a lot of time looking at the less than 2 acre-feet. We'll pull some information together. We'll see if we can get a better definition of it. But I'm not sure the expenditure in looking at this is worth the revenue.
Yeah, if the sense is that there's not much more water, agricultural water, to impose the fee on for this group of extractors, then it's the administrative hassle would be not worth the effort.
Yeah, well, I'll begin to look at it, see how much work it's going to be. If we can get an additional look at it, and then if it looks like there's a lot more detail we got to look at, I'll come back to the board and let you know what it looks like.
Okay, well, we're coming back to the board with a hearing and a resolution on May 28th. And so, you know, we just want to make sure that if we want to do this all at once, everything's in that resolution that the board needs to adopt. And I would also say that the notice should be consistent, right? The noticing requirements and the publication that's required, you know, 2 weeks in advance. So this is something we pretty much got to get nailed down, I think, in the next week.
Yes.
If we're going to do it. And if it's going to be all adopted as sort of one action by the board next month on the 28th.
Yeah.
Well, as it stands, the proposal is to hold a hearing to consider raising the fees as defined by the spreadsheet that John provided, including only those wells that are within the TWR boundaries, and excluding wells that are less than 2 acre-feet per year. Is that correct?
That's correct. And let me clarify one point, just to give the board a order of magnitude. 88 acre-feet at $37 an acre-foot is $3,256 per year. So you can burn up a lot of administrative expense looking for $3,200 a year. But we'll do some initial work and then we'll come back and give the board some more information, whether we think it's viable or not to go after that water that's considered agriculture.
Well, I think if we want in the future to have some equity among the various pumpers, the wellhead fee would be the best way to deal with the small wells, I think. And that's not something we want to deal with now, I don't think. But in the future, that might be a way to level the playing field a little bit.
So for what I was hoping, we were expecting tonight, the recommendation is the board would set a public hearing on May 28th. We'd present the proposed extraction fee, and you would exclude the de minimis extractors. And of course, within this, as Peter mentioned, we'll have to send out a notice as required under the law, and it would be published in a newspaper, general circulation at least twice. And Peter, do you think we should send it to all pumpers as well?
I think the more notice, the better. You cannot go wrong. Erring on the side of caution, more notice. Yes, I think that'd be a good idea.
Yeah, and I think we can use the same notice and that we put in the newspaper. We'll just put it in an envelope and mail it to the pumpers.
Yep.
Yeah, we should make sure they understand they can comment via email in case we're still doing this type of meeting, which I'm sure we will. So we can get those comments ahead of time.
Okay.
Or they can call as well. So do we have a motion?
Do you
John,
need,
you have that written down? I'll make that a motion. I just made one.
All right, second?
Second.
Anyone? Jim? Okay.
I think it was
Everything that you guys just talked about, I made the motion for them.
good going, Russ. Well done.
I'll use the staff recommendation as your motion.
Well, I would not recommend that because the staff recommendation talks about, sorry, I got to be technical here, all pumpers within OBGMA's jurisdictional boundaries. So that
Okay,
includes the gray areas. So anyway, I think staff is clear on the direction that the board has given with respect to
The DWR boundary.
yes,
Yeah, they did.
and what pumpers the fee would apply to and what pumpers it wouldn't, and we'll come back with and properly notice that in a resolution for your adoption at the next board hearing.
Okay, the other thing is the date.
I
Excuse me. One thing that should be in there as well is the date this takes effect. That would be July 1st.
that would probably be the easiest thing to target at this point.
Okay. All right, is there a second to Russ's motion?
I thought Johnny did.
Well, let me back
I
up.
did.
I need to,
amend my motion to take in what Peter just said,
okay.
right?
And
All right.
I'm trying to remember if the
Did we get us?
October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June. Yeah, July 1st to be fine.
Okay.
Just want to make sure it's consistent with the way we send out the quarterly extraction notices.
Yeah.
Yes, it is, as a person who writes the checks.
Mhm.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Call the roll.
Director Finch,
Yes.
Director Baggerly,
Yes.
Director Johnston,
Yes.
Chair Hages.
Yes. All right, next item, information items, Wildlife Conservation Board grant. Is that yours, Jordan?
Yes, it is. And now, rather than try to mirror two computers on my desk, I'm going to try a trick here that my 6-year-old taught me with her first grade Zoom class. Let's try that. And let me know if you can see this graphic.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, cool. All right, this is going to get better. So going forward, we'll be able to share these kind of graphics this way by, as Halston says, click on the show and tell slide. But what we've done so far with the Wildlife Conservation Board grant, which is one of the key components of that, it's what's becoming a Ventura River in-stream flow benefit. And the only shovel-ready project is the OBGMA's Southern Depth Discrete Monitoring Well. And so what you're seeing here is a conceptualization of this preliminary design. And what we've done thus far is come up with a design. We've solicited a couple bids from drilling contractors to install this. And surprisingly, they're coming out relatively lower than what we'd expected, which is good, because things always end up costing more than what you expect. But at least at this phase. And the idea is that if we can get down to a minimum 280 feet and nest 5 wells, we should be able to intercept all of the aquifers in that southern portion of the basin. And the location for this is narrowed down to an area by the Humane Society, right across from the old OBGMA offices, and almost adjacent to Soul Park Golf Course. And that's not too far from the E-log shown on this graphic. And you have the capacity to both come up with this preliminary design and also get that preliminary design most accurately to drillers. It correlates very well with the E-logs we have from Soul Park's wells to the east. So, and we're going right between those. If the Humane Society building property which I believe is owned by Ojai Valley or Ojai Unified School District, who is also a partner in the Wildlife Conservation Board granting. If they're willing to allow the well to be drilled on their property, that would really facilitate things. If not, it might go on the bike path, the bridle path, just near the easternmost end of the paved portion of that path, right when it basically dead ends, but actually turns left and as you go east at Soul Park. And that's about the location that we'd like to go. It's far enough from extraction wells that penetrate through all of these aquifers, and those aquifers are known to be there. So we can then start monitoring the perched aquifer in an isolated fashion near the discharge area to San Antonio Creek. That's the sort of the nuts and bolts update on where we are on this project. Once we get buy-in from the school district to put that well on their property, then we might be able to go really, really quickly here. It's an exciting thing to do, and we'll probably be drilling it via sonic methods. So it's among the quietest, least messy, and most sample retentive forms of drilling that are out there. So there's a quick update on where we are on that. And as John mentioned earlier, this is all funded via the Wildlife Conservation Board grant. So you have we've already started effectively billing the Resource Conservation District of the county, who is the primary grantee for all of this. So it's a whole lot of information for very, very little advance funding from the agency. John, anything to add?
No, our invoices, I think, total just under $7,000. The Resource Conservation District has billed for this. They've got to go to the State Wildlife Conservation Board and bill them. So they've collected all the invoices from all the different parties that are in this program. And I did get an email just a little bit ago that asking for a little more information from OBGMA. It'll be quick and easy to get that done. But as we get into regular quarterly billing, we should start to see some revenue come in. So I don't expect we'll have a lot of financial outlay, a lengthy time of financial outlay before we see the reimbursement from the state. So seems to be going well. And thank you, Jordan, for your help on this. And hopefully I'll inform the board whenever that grant money comes in to let you know. Right now, the billing was for essentially replenishment of funds already spent. And so, and that, of course, that'll be the case each quarter. But I think if I recall, the monies that we're asking for go back into last year. So we'll be seeing a revenue stream come in at least every quarter.
Okay, any questions?
No, but lots of cheers. Man, I've thought this type of individual aquifer monitoring for years. And Jordan, this is gonna thank you very much.
Okay, anything else? No.
Thank you.
We're adjourned at 4:07. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Richard.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.